All right, welcome to the podcast, John. It's nice to have you on.
Yeah, thanks
Um,
for having me.
yeah. If you want to start out by explaining a little bit about who you are, um, what type of work you're interested in, where you're from, any background contextual information for the audience.
Sure, that's pretty broad, but I'll just wing it. My name is John. Uh, I'm connected with our beautiful interviewer here through Peter Ralston. I think we both spent some time with Peter. So I'm into consciousness work, contemplation, meditation, understanding the nature of reality. Um,
Deep topics.
Deep topics. I love the super deep stuff,
Yeah.
and I love exploring just the nature of things, understanding, learning, evolving, that kind of stuff.
So I think a good starter question is like, what drives you to like focus on this information? What's like the primary of like I is it like truth, or is it like I want to know who I what is it, like curiosity of like what is real, or like what on a daily basis like drives you to pursue this type of work and ask these types of questions, do you think?
I think there's two things that come to mind for me, and the first one is curiosity. I've always been super curious. Like I was when I was a kid, I was turning over rocks to see what was under them, kind of thing. And so I'm still just doing that, but in different ways. Um, and I've always been kind of like metaphysically inclined, or like thinking about those kind of topics, like what is this? What am I? What am I thinking? What is death? That kind of stuff. And so I was driven that way, but I'm also driven by the thought of human potential, of my own potential, and then wanting to actualize that potential. And that puts a lot of force behind my activity. Yeah,
100%. 100%. um
not
have
wanting
you
to waste the opportunity that I have is huge. Like I see this as like a golden opportunity to use like this crazy intelligence and perceive all this stuff and understand this. And I think like if I was to just live a more passive lifestyle or to not think about these things, I'd be missing out on a lot of what is possible as a human. So
I feel that too. I feel that too when it's like, if I'm not pursuing this work, I always question like, is this actually the path I want to go down? And it always comes down to like, if I'm not doing it, I always feel like there's something deeper and I'm not hitting that deep. Like I could
yeah,
always go deeper and I'm just like
yeah,
living. I think a big thing too is like, I don't, it sounds like for you too, it's like you see it's that curiosity drive. So it's like rather than just living a mundane life, it's almost like
yes,
you innately see everything around you as like in a set with a sense of wonder and awe, and like what is like
for
this
sure.
is, it's like a crazy experience rather than just taking everything for granted. I think that's definitely huge, and it sounds like for you
Yeah.
as well.
Well, I definitely want to be entertained by life. Like I want life to be good and fun, and I want like when I look at a sunset or something, I want to be really fulfilled by that experience. And it seems like doing this work is the best way to have that, for life to just be cool and to be endlessly fulfilling and interesting. Because if you just live life without investigating anything, everything is very normal and very familiar, um, and very recognized, and that can get old. And I found that the consciousness work, or the discovery of new domains and direct experience, makes things absurd, and that's very just entertaining. It's just makes life more interesting, and I love that aspect of it. Yeah,
Do you think
never a
that
dull moment.
Yeah, do you think that the contemplation itself helps that? Because rather than like always having to seek like a bunch of like stimulation and like always have like a high level of like of stimulation, or do you think the contemplation, sitting in silence for long enough, you're able to like be able to see a sense of with a sense of wonder and awe in everything, no matter if it's stimulating or painful? Or do you think that's just like a side effect and it was like that before you did any type of contemplation
I
itself?
think I think we could explain the more interesting thing in two ways. The first of them being like your increased sensitivity. So yeah, when you sit still for a long time, it's boring as fuck. And when you are done sitting still and you go like eat a piece of cake or look at a sunset, it's way more rewarding because you have it to contrast against that emptiness or that not not fun stuff. And so it's given a whole new appreciation. You're like, wow, this is not necessarily always here. So that's one reason why it increases the quality of life. But the other reason is because you let go of all the labels that you've placed onto everything. And when you let go of the labels, then you don't know what it is. And when you don't know what it is, you perceive it differently. It becomes a whole new, um, fresh, beautiful, absurd event that you don't understand and that you can understand. Whereas with the label, you know what it is. It's that same old thing, and it's not really. It's no fun.
I like that. I like that.
Yeah,
It's it's the possibility. It's like when you don't know what it is, there's the possibility that it could be literally anything. So it's like your mind is open. Like, could it be this? Could it be that? It's like
yeah,
without attaching on to anything, right?
yeah. So
And
it's good
so
to use that.
then we can take that in what domain. So that's kind of broad, like to experience itself. What do you like contemplate? Like I don't. What are some of the most common things that you see people just like, or that you yourself like labeled and that it became interesting when you took the label off? Was it just like ordinary everyday objects, like thoughts or like feelings, emotions? Do you like see that you label your emotions when you stop, then it just becomes like pure emotion, or like what, where does that like inquiry kind of, where do you direct it towards, or can you direct it towards anything, or just I don't know.
So I'd say you definitely can effectively direct it towards anything. So you could contemplate what is a lamp, and you could have a pretty good time with what is a lamp. Um, so anything, it works with anything. But what I have spent the most time doing in the last couple years since beginning this work is self stuff, like what am I, what is emotion, what is thought, do I have free will, what is a body, things like that. Um, but I've also done things like or contemplated what is politics, what is society, what is space, what is time. All those things are worthy of what is lamp. All of it is worthy of contemplation, and all of it will yield something interesting. I think tackling the self aspects uh, have been most important for me because I am a self, and all I really care about is myself fundamentally. So that's what I've gone for.
Because you can only experience the world through yourself. So it's like when you understand, when you contemplate self, it's going to change literally everything, right? Is that what you
Everything.
experienced?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Do you
And so
find that after the, you said 4 or 5 month contemplation intensive, have you found that your experience considerably changed, like your just normal everyday experience of how you relate to things? Or is it more like during the contemplation, it goes super deep and then you kind of go back to normal with slightly altered? Or
uh,
how do you
well, so
experience it?
the point of that, obviously, like I would hope if I spent 4 months doing something that there was some after effect, that there was some lasting effect. I would hope, and I think that there has been some deep changes in the way that I perceive. Um, but fundamentally, even after doing 4 months of work, like working really hard, after a few months living back in normal survival life, perception was and is pretty much uh, back to normal. Not baseline. The level of fulfillment and the level of skill and effectiveness definitely increased, but life always returns to mundane, it seems, unless you're constantly constructing some like profound context or like trying to wow yourself. It always just goes back to mundane life. It just is what it is. Um, and I think that understanding was really helpful for me as well. That mundane is okay because, like I said before, I want to be entertained by this shit. And so I want it to be profound and interesting. And so I don't want it to be mundane. And so I'm running from the mundane aspect of existence, or the fact that it is mundane. And in so doing, I'm running away from life itself, which is ridiculous. So
So when you stop having expectations of what it should be, then it becomes more enjoyable, is what you're saying,
yeah, for sure. It becomes more
in a
enjoyable.
sense,
It becomes more real.
more real.
And real is fulfilling because it's just like, it's not hollow.
Let's talk about, you had a super interesting article on your website about, I think it's called, what is it? It's like Life's a Bitch, Then You Die. I think that's the
Yeah.
article you wrote. I
Yeah.
feel like that pertains to what we're talking about right here. So you talk about suffering and how we relate to suffering and the normal patterns that humans go through how we relate to suffering. So like, can you elaborate a little bit on like how do people normally relate to suffering, and if they related differently, what might that look like, and why might like someone want to relate different to their suffering?
Yeah. The basic disposition there that I was trying to express, I think, is expressed most clearly by this guy called Shinzen Young, who's a meditation teacher. And he says, the default way of operating is to tighten up and turn away. So you physically contract, mentally contract, whatever, tighten up and then turn away, look the other way from the suffering. And what I'm suggesting, and what this consciousness work requires you to do, is to open up and turn towards. And that's the gist of it. Physically open up, mentally open up, emotionally open up to whatever is present, regardless of its relationship to you or quality. Open up and turn towards it and pay attention to it. Because when you do that, you learn what it's all about. You gain mastery over the situation. And when you stop resisting things, this is just a rule, they stop sucking, which, you know, I didn't make the rules, but that is how it works. So open
So
up and turn towards.
in like experience whatever you're experiencing, like try to experience deeper rather than like trying to run away from it, in a sense,
Yeah, just try and experience it fully. Try and
fully.
experience at whatever is actually there in its entirety, all the
Not
way
trying
to
to
the root.
not trying to change it.
Not trying to change it. No, but you can try and change it, and I mean that's worth trying to do as well. Um, but that can be kind of a fruitless battle for some people, because obviously people who are suffering do try to change it. They just don't do it well, and typically they're not doing it well, I think, or this is what my interpretation is because they're trying to change it while tightening up and turning away. And so they're trying to change it from a place of ignorance. They don't understand what's really going on. And so it's kind of like trying to build a boat in a bottle with like your fist. You're just like punching punching the ball or something. It's not going to work. It's just going to mess things up.
Well, because
Yeah.
it seems like the common reaction, I've definitely experienced this, is where like you contract, you run away from it, and then you want it. Then at the same time, you somehow want it to get better and only experience a positive experience. But
Exactly. That's exactly it. Yeah. It
but
doesn't work that way though.
you can only go towards. It almost seems like if you want to have enjoyment in life, if you want to be like more fulfilled, you have to, oh yeah, like you said, go through it rather than away. It's like you have to go through your suffering, and then on the other side you will like understand it and be able to relate to it better, and that's what causes the fulfillment, not the only wanting it to be good, but it's like understanding it and relate. Is it like it's like it sounds like when you move towards it, you're able to relate to it better because you understand why it's there and what's causing it, in a sense.
Exactly. That's exactly right. Yeah. You're most powerful when you're in the place of truth. So when your consciousness or your experience is in the same place as whatever is true, or is the same as whatever is true, any action that you take is effective or more effective. Yeah. relating from or to a fantasy is never going to accomplish what you're trying to accomplish, because you're not manipulating the actual event, you're manipulating a concept about the event, and so it's disconnected from whatever is actually there, and so you're dead in the water basically.
Yeah.
And so opening up and turning towards any event, including suffering, including the fact that you're going to die, allows you to create a more mature and effective relationship to it.
So what type of how have you been able to relate differently to death through contemplation, or like how does what I don't know what at what point to go into this idea of death, but it sounds like you've done a lot of contemplation into it, and like you've really wondered and like done spent a lot of hours of like asking what is death and like trying to get to the bottom of it.
Yeah,
That's it sounds like it relates pretty closely to the idea of who am I. If you understand who you are, if you think you're the body's gonna die. But if you ask who am I on a deep level and think and then like experience something else, maybe that thing won't die, and that like changes your relationship to what is death. Because explain
yeah,
like some of the insights or like how you go about that process.
sure. Yeah, I think it would be useful or effective here to explain how we contemplate, uh, how we question. So, like, if you're asking, let's say we want to become conscious of or learn, directly experience for ourselves what death is or what death is all about. What you do is hold that question in mind. What is death? And you would just intend to experience the truth of that question, and then be open to whatever is true. So, what's most important is that you are completely open to experiencing whatever the case may be with regards to death. And then, once you're in that openness, you also intend, like a laser like intention, uh, to experience the truth. Um, and then eventually you will. And for some people, are really good at this kind of stuff, and some people it's not so effective, or I don't know.
Yeah.
But that's how it works. That's how you contemplate. And what happens is you can experience for yourself, um, what death is, and you can experience what death is. This is my experience. When you know what you are fundamentally or existentially, you understand what death is and what it is not. So as a self and as a body, death is imminent and obvious. So like these selves die, the bodies die and stop working. But if I understand myself to be existence or being, then of course I don't die, because existence can't stop existing and being can't stop being. And so that changes my understanding of what death is. Yeah.
Yeah.
And as you question it, it's I always going into it, like when I first learned about consciousness work and Peter Ralston and actualize.org. Are you hip to actualize.org?
Yeah, definitely, definitely.
He was a big influence for me early on. I thought that all of these insights, or like these big existential contemplative questions, would come like a bolt of lightning into my head. I'm like, oh, this is it, I got it. But the truth is that or for me, that the real like meat of the work, the real like emotional and intellectual shifts that happen and the understanding that takes place is kind of gradual. Like the instant enlightenments, the instant insights are there, and they're absolutely important. But like the heavy lifting is a process that kind of takes place through time, and so it kind of unfolds in that way.
Yeah, 100%. I was talking to someone yesterday. You might know him, Jack. Ed. Edson or something. I don't know. He did a lot of he did work in Changshin as well. He was
Mhm.
talking about how like I asked him can you be effective at like contemplation, or like what makes a practice effective, and like how
Mhm.
do I know that this practice is effective and what other one's not? And he gave me an answer that I was not expecting. He was like, whatever practice you do is the most effective one. It's like it doesn't. Some might be more effective, but if you don't do them, then they're none of them are going to be effective. So it's basically just like as long as you do it, that is what makes it effective. But he had his insight was basically like at the beginning you're not really going to experience anything out of the ordinary, but over time as you develop as you do it more and more, it's like that heavy build, like you said, like over time you start developing your ability to focus. And he kind of correlated like the more that you're able to focus, the deeper and more you'll understand these, deeper you'll be able to get into contemplation in a sense.
You do train up a lot of skills that just progressively allow you to go deeper and deeper into things. Like the ability to concentrate is huge. Like if you can't concentrate, you're screwed in terms of this work, because if you can't hold a question for any period of time, then you'll hold it, you'll dive into a little bit, and then you'll come right back to the surface, and you'll hold it, and you'll come right back to the surface, and you'll never end up going to the heart of the issue. So concentration is super useful. I don't know about necessary. I don't think anything is necessary. I mean, anything is possible,
Yeah.
but in my experience, without concentration, I like would not be able to experience or understand the things that I have so far.
It almost sounds like the results can be exponential in a sense, because if you don't have concentration, you're not going to get any results until you get a certain level of concentration. And then
Yes.
once you're able to have that concentration, it's not just going to go away or anything. And
Yeah,
that's just going to enable more and more and more insights from there.
absolutely. Yeah. It definitely seems that way. It's the learning curve is seems to be like exponential in this work. Like you start off and you're just groping, you're just in the dark, like kind of dawdling. And then you have some insights that are like and just shoot you off. And then I think maybe you go up and then you plateau again. And then you go up and then you plateau again. That's what it seems to be like for me.
Yeah. And it seems like for me, a lot of the first, like for like a year or 2 years after doing this practice, if you're not like doing like an intensive, if you're just doing it like a daily practice,
Mhm.
it's almost like as you meditate, as you contemplate more, you start making the distinctions of, oh, this is what, like, oh, I'm just trying to conceptualize this. And you realize this is just a conceptualization, and this is like an experience. And then like you're not even really having insights, but it's more just like distinctions of, oh, that entire time I thought I was meditating, I was actually thinking, or
Yes.
like, or like I was using my thought to try to confirm if I was not thinking or not, and stuff like that,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Or you could, yeah, absolutely. And that is like what I was saying with the most of the work, or like the real heft of the work happens in those kind of insights. And if you're paying attention and working hard and you really want it, every meditation is just filled with those kinds of insights. Uh, and oftentimes you'll just have the same insight over and over again. And that's what you need to like really solidify it in your experience. Like what you said, the thinking, like you'll be thinking that you're meditating effectively or something, and then you realize that, okay, no, there's this whole dimension of thought that is occurring full force, full force, that I didn't recognize is even there. And so yeah.
Yeah. It's it's almost like thoughts can be super subtle, and there's like these like gross thoughts are like, oh, that's obviously a thought. And then like on another level, it's like this more subtle thought that it doesn't appear to be a thought at first, but it's just like it's just there, and you realize that that's different from like still being still, or like having a just sitting in experience, because it's, or it's almost like there's certain like labels that you have on your experience and concepts, and you don't even realize that they are labels until you're able to see it as like, oh, when I take that away, my experience is different, you know?
Yeah. There, you experience so much stuff. It's like experienced as reality. And then you can have a shift where it's experienced as thought instead. So, for example, right now, both of us have a thought in our minds that's passive or it's subtle, it's in the background of what our body looks like and what the room looks like behind us, what our house looks like. We have this as a thought currently. It's like a subtle image that we're not aware of, but it is there. We don't experience it as a subtle image, we don't experience it as a concept, but it is there.
Yeah.
And then there's a whole other dimension of thought that's happening at the same time that's like you're having an internal dialogue right now. And you that's occurring in a different place. It's of a different nature, but it's still thought. So yeah, there's a whole lot here. That the human experience is like absurdly complex and multifaceted. And that's something that you learn too. It's like the complexity of this experience and the amount of processes that are going on in any given moment is just mind-boggling. And it can be, well, there's a lot of ways that you can like relate to that, but sometimes it's terrifying, sometimes it's overwhelming. It's like, oh my god, this is crazy. It's crazy shit. But
No, it's so easy to come into the work and oversimplify the hell out of it when you get started, and then it
yeah,
just become it's so easy to become overwhelmed, like, oh, I thought I only had to get rid of my thoughts, now I realize I have to, like, navigate, like, 100, like, all these different things that I
for
had no
sure.
clue about before.
Yeah.
So you talked about, like, there's, like, this subtle thought of the room around me. Is that,
Uh-huh.
like, an insight you can contemplate too? It's like, what is space and time? Because, like, this room around me, that's what I consider space and time or whatever,
Mhm.
and it's almost like it's just like a subtle thought of, like, it's over there, that's over there, that's over there, like, that's just, like, it sounded when you explained, like, whatever you just explained, it made me think of, like, if that's what a thought is, then, like, it like, time or just, like, space around us is just consist of thoughts, or, like, is that maybe an insight that you could have, or, like, you can dive into that when you're contemplating it?
For sure, yeah. So I think there's two like distinct things we can talk about there. And the first one is that um, your experience of the world is a mental experience. So like your experience of there being a world outside of you and like there being a whole world outside of this, that's entirely mental. And that's something worth considering because that mental world that you're projecting influences the way that you feel and relate to life every moment. And like we said before, it's typically so subtle as to not be noticed. What you will notice, however, is like the effects that conceptualization is having on your experience. You won't know where the effects are coming from, but the effects will be present. So that the first part is to become aware of the unseen mental world that influences your experience of life. And then the other aspect, like, okay, yeah, space and time. What are space and time? Um, and yeah, when you look into that, you can learn some interesting things. Like I worked with Peter, we spent some time on time and we spent some time on space, and the insights that we came to, and also the insights that I've read about in all these books that I've read and Peter's work and all the YouTube videos and all that. Um, what you can come to realize is that space is an artifact of perception. So what we call space is always only ever a perception. It's something that we experience. And the mistake that we make in Western culture is to assume that this experience confers to something in an external reality. So we have the experience of this space here, and that's a perception. And what we imagine is that exists somehow outside of perception or in objective reality. And when you don't make this assumption and you try to experience the true nature of existence or the true nature of space, you can experience that in absolute reality there is no space. Yeah, and I have had you can experience that. It doesn't seem that hard to really get that if you really want to, especially if you're in a dojo in Texas contemplating for like 16 hours a day. An experience like that is not that hard to come by, but you have to want it, and nobody cares about that. So nobody will know that time and space are both only perceptions, but those are both of those are worth knowing because they are the context in which we live our lives. They're hugely impactful, and so understanding their nature would be a good idea for anybody. Yeah.
It almost seems like the stuff that you're contemplating is stuff that through when you grow up, it's just stuff that you assume, oh, there's space and time that's real, or it's stuff either you're imprinted with by whoever, family, culture,
Hmm.
or it's just like, oh, I know that space and time is real. I don't have to question that. And when you do this work, it's like nothing is considered true before you try to
Yeah.
experience it.
Yeah. Like
It's
the idea that we could question whether space and time are real is like, even that is seems kind of ridiculous. Like, what do you mean space and time? What We're experiencing space and time right now. So yeah, that requires a ridiculous amount of open-mindedness to question because you're questioning something that you're experiencing right now. So
even that question, who am I? That almost requires open mindedness too, because there's so many
yes, it's
assumptions about
ridiculous.
who I am. It's like, oh, I already know who I am. Why would I need to contemplate that?
Yeah, absolutely. All this stuff requires an open-mindedness that I almost never come by in my interactions with people, um, which is fine. But
It's
like,
almost
it is rare.
it's almost because it seems to me because like you can't understand the value of the work until you actually do the work. And so
Yeah.
because of that, it seems that why would I ever contemplate space and time or self? Like that's not going to yield anything. Like there's no point. And then if
Yeah.
you actually do it, you can start having some like crazy insights, or like you can really reshape and become conscious of super deep things.
Hmm.
But until you become conscious of it, you have no clue what's possible, right? So it's
Yeah.
more like I think the hardest thing is like it sounds like Ching Shin helps you with like the dedication and the motivation of like, all right, I'm gonna do this every single day and I'm gonna have an insight. But like if you don't have that like structured regimental program to like help you go deeper and deeper, like it's really hard to maintain that motivation of like, all right, every day I'm going to contemplate for 2 hours. I don't
Hmm.
know what's going to happen. Maybe I won't experience anything. It's almost like, why the hell would I take 2 hours of my day to sit and do nothing if I
Yeah.
don't even know what I'm going to experience?
For sure. That's a question that you should, it's always worth asking before you spend 2 hours a day on anything. Why would I do this? For me, I didn't do any of it because I thought it would make me more effective or because I thought any of that. I just wanted to know out of curiosity. Um,
I think that's I think that's what drives me too. It's more like for me recently, you probably had this experience too. It's like I really am getting super curious on what is the nature of experience, what is
mm,
existence, or it's like after I took a couple of assumptions off of what I thought life in reality was, all of a sudden everything becomes like have become much more curious about all these things. So it's like growing up, I used to always be interested in like astrophysics. I was like, I want to
hey,
understand
me
like
too. I love
seriously,
space. Yeah.
100%. No, yeah, like growing up, I was like, how can I go the deepest and understand the most? Like, how can I contemplate like the universe and like the deepest possible things? And
Yeah.
then as I went through that, I started to realize that's just all thought and that's just all me like playing with different concepts about the universe. And I'm like,
Yeah.
what is this right here? What is existence? And that's kind of what I kind of made the distinction of like,
What is this?
what is this?
Yeah,
What am I experiencing right now? And it's almost
yeah,
like it's like really it's so hard to explain, but it's like rather than contemplating what is my place in the universe on earth,
uh-huh.
it's like what is being alive, or like it's like what
Yeah,
is
yeah. It's like
it's
I put it like this because it's so hard to put into words. Just like blah, like what is what is this? What is this shit right here? Because it doesn't even need to be formulated into like a real worded question. It's just like a general curiosity about what is existing right now. And I think that feeling, like, unless you naturally have it, I don't know, like, I don't know if it can be inspired through any book or anything like that. I think it's just a natural disposition towards the moment.
yeah. I think I definitely would like to think that it can be inspired or like it can be kind of sparked in people, because I feel
Yeah,
like a lot of people definitely have this curiosity, but they have no clue that this is the right, like, not the right way to pursue it. That's not, but like they try to pursue it in like certain fields because that's the best way that they know. That's like the
yes,
deepest that they can go. And I want to think that a lot of people have this instinct of like curiosity for, it almost seems innate, like everyone has some sort of curiosity about why they're here, and
yeah,
then certain cultural whatever makes life seem mundane. They're like, oh, all right, well, there's no point in pursuing it. But like a lot of people probably still have that drive, but it's like, what if, like, because I mean that was the case for me growing up too. It's like I didn't really know what this work was, and then I watched I watched one of Leo's videos on actualize.org, and I was like, dang, it's possible to like actually like, it's almost like you have to show people what's possible, or that's what inspires me. It's like people that are on the verge, because you're not going to convince someone that's like super entrenched in their beliefs. It's like, or super entrenched in like something and they don't want to open up to it. It's more like people that there's like this stat that's like 40 or like 60% of millennials call themselves spiritual but not religious. It's like they don't want to attach their spirituality onto any
60%.
religion. What's that?
You say 60%?
60% of millennials, and then like
That's
20%
awesome.
of all Americans or something like that. I can't
Damn, dude,
remember.
we're in business for our next generation. Is like they're gonna be wanting that woke stuff. Sweet.
Oh yeah, it's definitely growing a lot
Yeah.
in like, I'm wondering if it's like going to be sustained, because if you think about it, like the 1960s, that was like a huge generation of people wanting like interested in like spirituality but not religious. The
Yeah.
same type of stuff, psychedelic movement, all that type of stuff. And then it kind of went away.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's starting to come back. It's starting to
Yeah.
be like, you see a lot more interest in psychedelics. Ayahuasca is becoming a huge thing nowadays. Like
Yo.
it's becoming so popularized and like mainstream, but
Yeah,
um I think it's
for sure.
just
And
more.
back to your
Go ahead.
go ahead.
You go
Okay, I
ahead.
was gonna say back to your thing with like how do people get into it? Um, I think you're definitely right that everyone has like an innate curiosity about things. And I think that the people who get into consciousness work, um, or who are susceptible to being like suggested consciousness work are already curious about existence but just don't have a way to formulate it, or
Yeah.
that curiosity has never been validated externally. So no one has said like, yeah, this is a thing, or like, yeah, like we actually ask these questions. Um, but as soon as they're given that like little push, then they're golden. Yeah,
Yeah, 100%. It's like when the common experience when you read something that hit super deep, you're like, have experienced that exact thing before, but I've never been able to put it into words. So
yeah,
it's the same thing. Like I have this curiosity, but I never knew it's just like wondering about existence, I never knew that I could actually sit down and focus on this question alone and actually like
Mm,
direct my attention towards I want to understand what existence
yeah,
is.
yeah. Like for me, learning about monks and the fact that there are dudes who's like their whole career and their life basically is just to sit and contemplate for 12 hours a day was a relief to me. And I was like, you're like, okay, like that's great. Like that's really nice. Uh, because that just like it validated it for me. I was like, okay, this is something worth pursuing. These questions are worth asking, obviously, because thousands of people spend their entire lives doing just that. So yeah, I think it's coming to understand that it's worth doing, um, that it's valid. Yeah,
And that yeah,
super.
and that it's actually possible to have insights that like
Yeah,
by actually focusing on it, it's not all intellectual. You can actually have like
yes,
experiences of
for
direct
sure.
existence.
And so the monks were great to learn about because I was like, okay, there's dudes who spend their whole life contemplating, but then finding people like you is also so helpful because it shows me that that kind of insight is not only for the monks. Normal schmucks like us can pursue absolute enlightenment and experience the fact that time and space and self don't actually exist. Like, that's great. And that's awesome.
Yeah,
So,
it's
to anybody
definitely
who's watching this podcast, you can do it. Me and Ethan are schmucks. We're doing it, and it's good. Yeah.
yeah, it's almost like it's definitely reassuring because it's like you can connect with so many people on the internet or like you can watch so many YouTube videos, read so many books, but it's hard to you don't realize until you actually meet someone like it's hard to relate to people because it almost seems like it's so easy to put yourself in like at least for me it's like it almost doesn't seem normal because it's not it is becoming more widespread but it's still not like that widespread
Yeah. No, no,
not too many people are getting into it more than before but
no.
it's like you don't walk up to any person on the street and like the chances are they're not going to have any clue what you're talking about, right?
Yeah, for sure. But they do know what mindfulness meditation is. Everyone knows what meditation is now, which is
Yeah,
great. Nobody knows what consciousness work is, and nobody knows that you can experience the nature of reality for yourself. But the way I explain it is usually that like I'm like, okay, you know what mindfulness is, you know what meditation is. The reason that guys started doing that back in the day was actually to learn what existence is, and so use that the leeway of meditation into the consciousness work to try and help explain it that way. And it's worked pretty well in a lot of cases. I'm like, just think about this. What are those monks doing all day? Like, what's the game? What's it about? And I think fundamentally what the monks were about was insight and happiness, understanding, and freedom from suffering. Yeah.
100%. It's it's crazy to think like all right, you can say you have like any sort of like breakthrough experience after doing it for like 2 years. What happens when these monks go 12 hours a day for their entire lives? It's like
Yeah.
that's got to be so deep.
So ridiculous. Well, I actually kind of like shit on monks because I think most of the monks are just kind of wasting their time in a way, it seems. Because like when you look at what they actually do, a lot of the time the monks are not really doing hardcore consciousness work. It seems like Zen temples, like some badass Zen dudes do it, but like most of the monks in the world are not really mastering themselves, are not really like doing consciousness work. They're kind of just like chilling. It seems. I don't know. I don't know why I said that. What was that a tangent from?
It's a tangent from like I was like, imagine a monk that meditates like their entire lives for 10 hours a day. How deep can they go? And
Yeah.
it's like there's definitely degrees of it because like I've heard various people. I think say that like, yeah, there's definitely monks that meditate for like 30 years and they never have any breakthrough because it's
Yeah.
maybe they just aren't going hard enough, or it's just like they get stuck in the meditation of this certain technique. I feel like that could be a problem too. You find one technique and then you just do it for like 30 years. And then what if it's the wrong technique? And then
Yeah.
there could have been a different one where you
Yeah.
see crazy results, but you stuck with only this one because you thought that it was the only right one, you know?
See, that fucking sucks. The thought of that sucks. I think yeah, like they do it kind of passively because they just like are born into the monk thing. So they're like, yeah, this is what I do. This is what I do. There's no like passion. Like like Peter Ralston, I think most of his success comes from how passionate he was, and like he really wanted to like move forward and have these insights, like, and like that's how you have the insights through like really wanting it and really going for it. And I think most of the monks just kind of like passively adopt it as like, this is like my career, like I'm just gonna chill and be a monk. I don't know. The thought of the levels of insight that some of those guys must have is just, it's I love thinking about that. Like there's this guy Joshu Sasaki who died when he was like 106 years old, um, and went into full monastic life when he was 13. And so from 13 to 106, he meditated for literally like 10 hours a day. And
Jesus.
what the hell is his experience like? Like what is his experience? It's probably ridiculous. Ridiculously different than the average person's. But I don't know. Maybe it's just the same old shit. We'll see.
It's got to be different.
It's got to be different.
It's gotta be. It's gotta
I'd be
be.
really disappointed if it wasn't different.
Yeah. Well, it's one thing that I found super interesting. Have you ever heard of the 10 ox herding pictures?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So
Come
it's
on,
like
Ethan.
yeah, so if you like take a look at those, it's like if you actually read them, the last three are like super interesting, or like the last four. It's like, all right, the ox is synonymous with enlightenment. So it's like chasing the ox, finding the ox, taming the ox, integrating enlightenment, that whole process. And then if you look at the last three, it's like ox and self are realized to be no different than are realized to be one, all right,
Mhm.
non-duality. And then it's like, then that even that is dropped. And then I can't remember what it was, but I was like, that
There's a
sounds
the ox and the dude are sitting together. They're chilling at his house. They're like back at the house, like just kicking back. They're like, yeah, we got it. And then there's a blank circle. And then there's the dude in the marketplace.
yeah, the dude in the mark. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that dude. He's fat. He has a bunch of food, or a bag of food. Love that.
Going back into society.
Yeah. What do you think about that? What were your thoughts on it?
I haven't gone too deep into it. I've read like a bunch of summaries and I have like a bunch of notes on like what it, like the metaphor is, but I've never actually like read the book, you know.
Yeah.
But I think it just opens my eyes because I'm like, all right, if I'm at the stage of like looking for, if I'm at the stage of like seeing the footprints, that's where I see myself. I'm like, at this point, I know there is an ox.
Yeah.
Maybe I've had like a glimpse of it, but it's for like 15 seconds. It's like for like not very long, and then I lose it.
Mhm.
What happens when you, all right, what does taming the ox mean and integrating it into everyday life? That I'm like, all right, you have an enlightenment experience. What does it mean to like integrate that into your daily life? That sounds pretty far off to me. And then I see like, oh, and then you go even further than that.
Yeah.
And then you realize that it just makes me realize that the possibilities or like how deep you can go. And that's kind of like, it kind of excites me, like seeing
Yeah.
if I'm like around this stage, or like if I'm synonymous with like what this stage is referring to, there's 8 more stages. Like I'm not even close to like the
Yeah.
possibilities of what you can understand with this work. So
Yeah.
like, how deep can I go? How
Yeah.
much it almost makes me like doubt myself too. It's like, maybe I'm not doing very much. I'm doing like 30 minutes an hour a day. Am
Yeah.
I ever gonna experience that? Like, if
Yeah.
like maybe I won't ever get there, and that it's kind of two-sided, you know.
Yeah.
What about yourself?
I relate to everything that you just said for sure. But the excitement part is huge there. I feel that. And like reading about accounts of like super enlightenment stuff and like the big enlightenments and the whatever, that's super exciting. That's super motivating. Because I'm just curious, like what the hell is that? What are they talking about?
It
And yeah,
sometimes that can be a driver in and of itself. It's like, I want to understand what the hell this guy is talking about. I want to get to the same state of consciousness that this guy is in when he's writing this.
yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I get that. I got that so hard with Peter's work when I read it that I dropped out of school and spent all of my money to go hang out with him. So yeah,
That's crazy. I was Do you think it was worth it?
absolutely. Yeah, for sure. Of course, I'm going to say that because I spent all my money on it. And if I was like, oh, where's a waste of money, I'd look like a schmuck. But I actually think it's absolutely worth the money. Like that was a very effective use of time, a very like fulfilling use of time. I learned so much in those 3 months. Um,
And
so
it's
good.
not like what you would learn in college too. It's like completely
No,
different. It's like,
no.
I think that's what attracts me to Ralston's work is it's like, you're gonna learn a ton of stuff, but what you're learning is stuff that it's hard to find anywhere else.
I didn't find it anywhere else, man. I That's what attracted me so much to Peter. Before I found Peter's stuff, I was reading philosophy, like Western philosophy, like
Yeah.
Nietzsche, Schopenhauer, all those kind of like stuff. And then I read Ralston, and I was like, okay, that is completely what I was looking for that these other guys were not doing. And it was just like spot on. It's experiential.
Yeah.
He's real. He's going with the experience, and the experience is all we have. So it just clicked. It's
100%.
real. Most philosophy and what most people think that Peter is philosophy, and what most philosophy is just thinking. Like for so long, it was just really really smart white dudes having cool ass thoughts and then writing them down, which is valid and useful and it's great and fun to think about. But it's disconnected from our direct experience in most cases. I saw there are some philosophers who were hip to direct experience and who like really had some good stuff to offer, but most of the time philosophy was just conceptualization. Yeah, and so
Yeah.
it was so nice to find Peter's stuff.
Definitely, definitely. It definitely hits different. It's definitely like, when you read it, you're like, this is, you can see the difference. It's like, it's not even close to any, even like in the spiritual community, I would say it's like, you can hear people talking about enlightenment, but Rawson is still on like a completely different
He's
side
not
of the
fucking
coin.
around.
No, he's
No, no
when
cap,
he
as the kids say.
what's that?
Peter Olson is no cap.
No cap. Yeah. And no, when he explains his own experience, I thought that was super interesting too. So like, you probably read the Book of Not Knowing because that's like his core book.
Yeah.
There was something in the book where he talked about like, well, two different things that I found super, like, it almost excites you to learn about the experience enough, and then you're like, all right, now I want to do this work. And
Yeah.
so like, one of his was like, he spent hours and hours and hours contemplating in like a shack in his friend's backyard or something, and then
Mhm.
uh he had an enlightenment experience, and he looked in the mirror and he didn't recognize, or like he didn't identify with the body so much that he didn't even see himself there, which is like a common enlightenment experience. And then
He said he was surprised that his body was still there. He was like, whoa, that's still me. Something like that.
yeah, that's what it was. Yeah, he was surprised that his body was still there. And then the interesting thing is like he said he was like driving around and he did not even have, it didn't even occur to him to like say anything about it. It just felt like there was no one
Yeah.
there to be like, I had this experience right now. This is crazy. It was more like it just never even occurred to him. I'm like, how does that even happen?
The story was that he drove there with a guy. A guy convinced him to go there, and he went there with the guy. And then Peter had the enlightenment, and he was driving back with the guy who took him there, and he didn't even tell the guy.
Yeah, that's what. Yeah, it didn't even
He
tell
didn't
him.
even tell the guy, and that was the only reason they went there. But the thought didn't even come up, like, to tell him about it. So
Yeah,
that tells you something about what a real
enlightenment.
solid enlightenment is like.
And then what people thinking that they're enlightened and they're
Right.
talking about it. It's easy to make that distinction when you hear a story like that. When people are
Yeah.
like, I've had so many enlightenment experiences and blah 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 or
Yeah.
whatever. It's like, all right, it's pretty obvious.
That's
Like
that's why I'm hesitant to say that I've had enlightenment experiences, because I have not had anything that
like
I
that.
never
Yeah.
have never looked in the mirror and was like shocked. Like, I'm shocked every time I look in the mirror, but there's never one time that I was like, that I would write about in a book. Like, this was the time that I had that. So I don't
I
know.
don't know if you've watched some of Leo's older content. Kind of gave me that vibe. It sounded like he took some super deep psychedelics and he's like, but then he still had a bunch of ego. He's like, I had this enlightenment experience. I
Yeah.
am like I went deeper than any man alive. I'm like,
Yeah.
what are you talking about right now? But it sounds like he comes off as really authentic,
Hmm.
but sometimes it's like then he'll just throw something like that in there and I'm like, it makes me question. It's like,
Yeah.
all right, this stuff is super interesting and it goes super deep. And then at the end, he's like, I'm becoming more enlightened than any human alive. And I'm like, all right, you had me there until that point.
It's definitely a huge claim that he's making. Huge claim.
Yeah.
But skepticism is good. Uh, but I'm open to that being possible. I don't see why that's not possible. The dude did 5-MeO for 30 days straight.
That's what I was
Like,
gonna.
who knows? I'm sure he had some ridiculous experiences, regardless of whether he's the most enlightened guy ever. I don't know. It was definitely ridiculously deep or fucked up or whatever. I don't know. Have you ever tried DMT or 5-MeO or anything?
No, I'm really curious about 5-MeO. It sounds like you got to work your way up to that. I don't know if you just start with 5-MeO in a super small dose, or if you try something else first and work your way up, and then like start with a small dose, and that is like it's like a higher version of other. I still have to do more research on it.
Yeah, me too. I'm definitely excited. I'm definitely going to do it. As I mean, Leo sells it pretty hard.
Yeah, yeah.
He's like, one of his videos, he's like, if you don't do 5-MeO, you're wasting your time. Like, meditation is useless. You need 5-MeO.
No, I
He
actually
didn't say that.
talked
He
to
didn't say that, but
I talked to one of the guys I interviewed on the podcast. Um, he said he did it, uh, worked his way up. It's almost crazy because he was telling me about it, and he was saying that the guy that he got it from, he tried it once, and he's like, "This stuff is too deep. I don't want to ever touch this stuff again." So it's like you have to have a certain level of development. Like you have
yeah,
to have a certain level of like, I don't even know what you need for it, but some people that get into the psychedelic space, they just like do something and it scares the shit out of them, and then they just
yeah,
can't do anything again. So I'm like, what is required to be able to go deep with psychedelics?
yeah.
I don't know what it is, and that's what I'm curious. Like, I'm like, what do you need to like not get super like? It seems way too easy to get confident. Like, oh, I can
Yeah,
just take however much I want. I'll be cool. I've meditated before. Like, I'll
Yeah.
be good, you know?
Yeah. I don't know, man. I think a huge contributor to that is how badly do you want it? How badly how badly do you want it? Because it is so scary. Like I have done DMT a few times and it is so scary. Like it's so serious, like such a big deal event that I don't see why you would ever do it unless you had a really good motivation for it. It seems like Leo really does, you
Yeah,
know.
if he's doing it 30 times in 30 days, Jesus.
What the
That
fuck?
guy wants
I
some
wonder
truth. That guy wants
I wonder
truth
what
really
Martin
bad.
Ball thinks about that. Like
Yeah.
if he told Martin Ball they did 30 days worth of 5-MeO, like is that stupid? I don't know. I am so
To
happy
each
that
their
Leo
own.
exists, man. That channel has been so fun to watch through the
Okay,
years.
here's my thing with actualize.org. That's how I kind of got into this work, right? So he's the one that kind of introduced me to a lot of this stuff and like the
Yeah.
question of what is existence, who am I? That's kind of like where I first heard it.
Uh,
And so it's almost like it became really easy to fall into the trap of just idolizing him as like he understands. It's like this guy understands way more than I do, so I'm
yeah.
just gonna trust him. And why should I ever like be skeptical of him because he's just way deeper into the stuff than I am. And
Yeah.
it's a serious trap, and it was super bad for me at times where I was like, oh shit, my entire belief system is centered around what this guy is saying. Like this is
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
good. I
Yeah.
had to step back, and I was like, all right, I'm not gonna watch this content for a year because I need to like balance it out with like
For sure.
other stuff. And so
Yeah.
now I started to come back to it every once in a while, maybe watch like one out of three of the videos that he releases.
Hmm.
But like I feel like that's super common too. If you go to his forum, there's a lot of people that like idolize him, and it's almost like he has like a cult like following. He
Hmm.
explicitly says in his content, don't believe this, whatever. Like he puts all the warnings there, but just saying it, like people are still gonna just create like belief system out of his work.
Sure. Yeah.
And I think it takes a certain degree of like I want to understand this stuff, and I want to understand it on my own. If you kind of just have like, oh, this stuff is cool, like I'm interested in what this guy's saying, it's too easy to just like say, oh, this guy, look how deep he is. How could I ever get to
Right.
that level? Like this must be true. That sort of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah. For sure. You can get to a point where somebody just becomes an authority, and once they're an authority in the matter, then you basically stop thinking for yourself, and that's what's crippling.
Yeah.
What was so useful for me, because I fell into a similar trap, because like you, he was the first person who explicitly talked about enlightenment stuff. So I had been reading that philosophy and like super into that freshman year of college, like reading a couple books a week from the library of philosophy and loving it. But there was something kind of retarded about it, or like it was like not hitting the spot. I was like, this is a little bit stupid, or like I don't really know. These are just these dudes' thoughts. But then my friend was like, all right, watch this. It was the most shocking truth video, and I was like, bam. And so ever since I watched that, I've just been like totally on board, like with the metaphysics and the contemplation and enlightenment stuff. And yeah, at first, because he was the one, he was like the the guy that I learned from. I really did believe in him, and like kind of like took him to be an authority, and that was really good. I'm glad that I did that, absolutely, because he had a lot of good things to say and still does. But I had to break away from believing him and depend only on my direct experience, only on what I'm actually experiencing, and throwing away all the rest. And until it's what I've actually experienced for real, uh, I don't rest and I don't speak to it.
I
And
like that.
I don't claim to know it. I don't believe it. Yeah. Just being really strict with yourself. Like, have I actually experienced that to be the case? or has Leo articulated it so clearly that I can articulate it as well and I understand it? Because a lot of the enlightenment work makes sense, especially to a philosophically minded person. It's like, yeah, the self doesn't exist. I'm not a self, of course, that makes sense. Um, but what you have there is an idea instead of an experience, and the experience is way fucking different, especially in cases of the self. Um, so yeah, just throwing away all the authorities and depending only on your direct experience. We don't want to do that because I didn't want to do that. The resistance I saw to that was that my direct experience is actually super limited compared to what I've heard. So if I
Yeah.
binge 50 hours of Leo videos, I'll have this like huge grandiose concept like, oh, I understand all of life's secrets. Um, and yeah, I'm probably closer because I've listened to that stuff, but I haven't actually experienced any of it. I haven't had the emotional impact and the cognitive like reframe that comes from directly experiencing that the self does not exist. And so, yeah, just throwing away everything and being only with the moment. Yeah.
It's almost like you have to be okay with, yeah, like you said, after you watch a video, it's like this thing is so grand. I'm gonna go focus on direct experience now because that's like the only way to understand this stuff. It's like, all right, what is my direct experience? It's like, oh, it's just kind of mundane. It's like I'm
It's
having a certain,
mundane and meaningless.
yeah, it's mundane and meaningless, and like I want to get to that point, and it's like this is not even close to that point. So like I'm just gonna believe that, and then it's so much easier, and it's like,
Try to get some 5-MeO. Ah.
yeah, it's I don't even know. What's crazy too is I don't know if it's due to weed becoming legalized, but psychedelics are starting to become legalized. So
Yeah.
I saw that in Canada, I think like about a month ago, they legalized it for clinical trials. Like a
Hmm.
bunch of clinical trials are going to happen in
Yeah.
Canada right now.
Hmm.
Denver, it's decriminalized. Somewhere in California, Santa Cruz or something is decriminalized. Oakland's decriminalized. Obviously, Brazil, you can take ayahuasca. They sell a bunch of like psychedelics legally down there.
Yeah.
Not all of them, but like a bunch of them. And it's like,
There's also a whole lot of underground psychedelic stuff. Like I did an ayahuasca ceremony in Harrisonburg, Virginia, which is weird, but it's possible. And there's so many therapists apparently who are using psychedelics like off the books because it's not legal, but they know it's effective. And so yeah, it seems like
so
massive, massive shift in that direction.
I'm wondering if it's going to be a compounding effect. So like the generation before the generation that's using it right now, they're like, oh, don't ever touch drugs. This generation, the generation that's like, I don't know, 20 to 30 ish, they're
Hmm.
starting to actually like maybe 20 to 35 ish. They're like actually using it. And then now our generations are growing up where it's starting to become normal. So I feel like
Yeah,
there's got to be some sort of compounding effect where like by the time in 20 years it's like way more normal than it is now.
yeah, I think so. I think that it will become mainstream. Um, if only because it's so effective in the clinical trials that they've done.
Yeah.
Like with psilocybin mushrooms, they work. They really work like well for addiction, for fear of death, like terminally ill people. It's great for them, and so based just on that, I don't see how it doesn't blow up. Also, because like our mental health as a world culture is so fucking shitty right now. It's so bad,
I
and that
agree.
any like the psychedelic solution will be welcomed. I think people will be like, okay, we really need that. And honestly, I think we're gonna see like the boomers who put those laws in place are gonna start to die off, and
That's a good point too.
they're really the only reason that such dumb laws were put in the first place. So
Yeah.
Dirty boomers ruining the world.
No, no. There's this cool idea in a book called like Structure of Scientific Revolutions, which is basically like
Yeah. I
it,
didn't
it
read that, but I know a lot about it.
yeah, I ended up reading it. I kind of like forced myself to read it, and I'm kind of glad I did because there's so
Yeah.
many good ideas in it, like to understand how science evolves. But
Big
basically,
name, like what's the guy's name?
Thomas Kuhn.
Kuhn, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
He
But
did he coin the term paradigm?
yeah, he coined the term paradigm.
That's crazy.
And so
Okay.
his idea of a paradigm shift, he's like, what the older generations that are more conservative that have been gone through the system and like have that set of beliefs, they're never going to change their beliefs. He basically said, like, you're
Yeah.
not going to convince a boomer to ever believe in drugs or like the value, not drugs in general, the value of psychedelics in certain um hallucinogenic drugs. And so basically his idea was that for a paradigm shift only occurs when all of the old people that will never change their beliefs, when they die out, all the new ones with more liberal, more open ideas that kind of question like, all right, this belief that you put in place, it seems to have a lot of limitations. Like, why are we still using it? Like, what if we can go to this better belief?
Yeah.
And then if you've been indoctrinated into it, it's like, because that's just the way it is and it's never going to change. Then if you haven't been indoctrinated into it, you can see with fresh eyes. And that's like the
Yeah.
only way that it changes. And it doesn't change by like doing like the scientific method. That only is like incremental. Like, that's all. It's almost like the scientific method is like, it's progressing within a paradigm. He's
Yeah.
talking about an entire paradigm shifting. So it's like, yes, that's going to progress, but the only real progress, like, um, there's many examples of it, but it happens when a radically new idea that's more inclusive than the
Yeah.
previous one is put in place. But there's
Yeah.
always going to be, you can always progress more and more. And I think that's kind of what we're seeing with the psychedelics, with um, like the philosophical, like materialism itself. I know that's talked about a lot in actualized.org and stuff like that, but it really makes a lot of sense. Honestly, it's like there's stuff that's other. There's like, you can't explain everything through the materialist philosophy, right? So it's like
No. Yeah.
you can't even get close to explaining it. And so
Especially now, we're really running into the limits of materialism, and our physicists are starting to get woke, so to speak, which is really cool.
yeah, 100%. You like, especially, yeah, like the high level physicist, it's almost like I would almost equate materialism with like thinking that everything is made of atoms. The
Yeah.
higher level physicists are like, all right, well, everything's made of strings and quarks and all these weird, like all these like super advanced concepts. And that's like, that also means that there is no like object here. It's just like made of a bunch of like hypotheticals or whatever.
Yeah.
It's like understanding that although I see an object, I don't even know how you would explain that. Like, that's what I struggle with because like I've like kind of done a lot of research on this, but like it's so obvious that there are objects. How do you explain
Yeah.
to a person that materialism isn't real when it's the most obvious one, and that's why it's so easy to believe, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a huge, very weird thing to try and explain to people. And
And
I don't think that you can really grasp the. Do you know what idealism? The term idealism.
yeah,
It's basically just not materialism.
it's like the opposite of materialism. Yeah,
Yeah. It's like everything is mental. The world is an idea. I think you only really kind of grasp that or come to understand that if you really want to, if you're really curious about what reality is, because it requires you to be open in an uncommon way, in a very uncommon way,
yeah,
in a way that I haven't come across in very many people just in normal life.
100%.
So, yeah, but in terms of like changing the cultural paradigm, I think that that typically starts with the intellectual elite. You know what I mean? Like the academics.
Yeah, it's like Ken Wilber would call it like the leading edge. When the leading edge, once a certain number of people, it's like when the elites are like the leading edge. It's all, I don't really want to use the word elites because it's like that's kind of like the has baggage with like authority, like they are the authority. But it's like when the smartest people on earth get to a certain point, everyone else is like, oh, we that might actually be the case. Like these people are doing that. So it's like Ken Wilber has a super interesting idea of like once 10% of the population hits a certain stage of development, then that's when it permeates the culture and people, and that's when like the paradigm shift
Oh,
happens.
that's cool. I never heard that. 10%. So it's like it reaches a threshold and then explodes.
Yeah. And like it
That's
can
awesome.
happen not like worldwide, but like say like 10% of Americans reach a certain stage of
Mhm.
development, then it'll start to become mainstream and people will start to open up to it because of how many people are. It's more like 10% of people are talking about it, so that's almost his threshold of like, oh, it must have some validity if this many people are talking about it. That's like how it kind of in mainstream culture, that's kind of how the leading edge is perceived.
That totally makes sense. Yeah. Why don't you like to use the word elite? When I say intellectual elite, what's wrong about that or off-putting?
I don't even know. It's more like,
I ask
especially
because I
especially
don't think that it's the smartest people who are setting the trends.
you
I think
think
it's
it's
the
the
people I think it's the people who have the most like political power in the scientific realm that set the trends. Do you know what I mean?
no,
I
yeah,
don't know if
that
you're
makes sense. That makes sense. Like
it,
if some nobody is talking but isn't insanely is a genius, if no one's heard of him, he's not going to change anything.
they'll say piss off. Yeah, it's like it's the guys who like publish journals and like who are the most respected that
But
get to
it's
say what's real.
it's not even almost publishing journals. It's like it's almost more like pop fame, like Neil deGrasse Tyson. I don't think he's published a lot of journals, but like or like Sam Harris or like Michio Kaku or whatever his
Kaku,
name
yeah,
is. Like a lot of these guys are just like internet famous for being scientists, but I don't know how many journalists or like how there's probably people that have done a lot more like actual scientific work and like written
that's true.
papers on stuff, but
That's
they're
true.
just like the most public about it, I guess.
But like what happens is like those guys are reading the journals.
Oh yeah.
So it does start in the journals that they because like yeah, you're right. Those are public figureheads, but they're getting all their information from somebody else. Their job is just to be famous and like cute.
Their
Yeah.
job is just to show you what you don't know that the scientific journals are talking about.
Yeah, and make it into a digestible, entertaining form. And some of them are really good at that. Michio Kaku was like I said, I love space stuff. He was so fun to learn about space from back in the day because he puts it into these crazy like magical terms and conceptualizes things in a fun way. So
100%.
I would love if Neil deGrasse Tyson starts saying that matter doesn't exist and the fundamental nature of absolute reality is God's mind. Oh my God, I would love that.
I don't think that's gonna happen.
Neil deGrasse Tyson won't say it, but I think in our lifetime somebody will. Some Neil deGrasse
Someone,
Tyson.
I think, yeah, someone will definitely get to that level. Talk that's gonna build their brand around these ideas.
Oh my God, dude, I hope so. It's really possible, I think.
It's almost like you're gonna see another Leo, but has more authority and that's like trusted more because like if you take anyone other than people that are like following him, they're gonna sound like, oh, I don't trust this. Why would I ever trust this dude? Some random dude on the internet. Maybe he has a lot of followers, but like anyone can have a lot of followers. But it's like I think the difference is like cultural trust. Like eventually our culture is going to trust some guy that has in the not, I don't even know if you like in the scientific community, but like that is popularizing these things.
He can talk good and sounds good,
Dude.
and he has clout. That's all you need.
Yeah.
And maybe a degree. That always sounds good.
What is the degree in transpersonal
Astrophysics.
psychology?
Honestly, no, like physics or something would be probably
You
better.
think?
Transpersonal psychology sounds a little bit woo woo. And like, I feel like what we need is a guy who's not woo woo at all, who's just like
Yeah.
a mathematician or something that people really believe in.
I think it's when these anti-materialist ideas start to become normal in science and they're actually people, because I feel like right now it's almost like you can't talk about this type of stuff in the scientific literature because it's like it goes against everything that like the
Yeah,
scientific paradigm is founded on. So maybe once that starts to open up, then people in the scientific community, but like right now I don't see like, because like you talked about, you can go super deep into like quantum physics or like string theory or like all these different things. But if you don't have a direct experience, that's still all conceptual, right? And
yeah,
it doesn't really get to the heart of the matter.
hmm,
So to get to the heart of the matter, you're going to need someone that is open enough to the ideas that we're talking about and that also has like some direct experience of it so that he or she actually understands beyond just the conceptual level of like
for
everything's
sure,
not made of matter.
for sure. God, man, those people exist out there. There are really, really impressive people
They're alive right now.
that are alive right now,
It's
for
gonna be
sure.
some kid, some 5-year-old today is gonna be like the future.
Yeah,
Yeah,
for sure. He's. I'm really excited. I think we're alive in a really, really exciting time. Uh, and I'm super hyped for it. I'm glad
yeah,
we're going through this. We're in like such a dark age right now, and I'm glad we're getting it out of the way early in our lives right now because we have the rest of our lives to like transition into something more powerful, more true, more conscious. Do you know what I mean? Like if this pandemic slash environmental collapse slash social unrest was happening when I was 60, I would just throw in the towel probably and be like, fuck it. But it's happening in my 20s, so I can be involved and I can watch the world turn into the place that I hope it does. Or I can watch it burn. And
yeah.
either way,
The only thing I would say, it's like I have a hard time saying like this is the dark age and like the forward's gonna be the light age because if you think about it, it's like think of like the '60s.
yeah,
They probably saw it the same way, and now they're like super old and they're like because we're always going to be becoming more conscious, becoming more inclusive. And so like at what point is it like I mean, I guess I can see your point too. Maybe it seems like we're going at such an accelerated rate right now that
mhm,
maybe it will just become like the progress will the progress in the consciousness domain rather than just like we're becoming more of a technological society and we're understanding more scientific thought. I think the
no,
consciousness aspect of it we're really starting to see ramp up that maybe we haven't seen before.
for sure. And there's also like the aspect that we might actually kill our species. We have the internet. Our entire global species is connected via the internet. That's crazy. That's never happened before. Like there's a lot of things happening right now. They're just uncannily perfect timing, and like just so intense. Like the internet has connected our whole species. We might kill our species through environmental collapse. Um, we're at the time now that we're coming to understand the actual fundamental nature of reality itself, and it might permeate into mass culture. Like these are big developments, and the chances of them happening randomly is absurdly low. Like it seems like we're intentionally placed at this super catalytic, intense place here, just I don't know, for fun or something, or for some cosmic order. I don't know.
One super cool idea too. So going into, you've probably heard of spiral dynamics,
Yeah, of course.
and so like there's like spiral dynamics, but then like I've been going super deep into integral theory right now. So basically, it's like
I
spiral
love catching
dynamic.
integral theory is so cool and
It is.
so obvious.
It's
I don't know
so.
why that didn't catch on more.
I know. Maybe I don't even know why either. It's almost like one thing I'm excited about is like how can I reduce the barrier to people understanding this? Because like the first time I read about it, I'm like, this seems like super complex. Like I see AQAL, and then like there's like all these like short codes, short terms, and like
Yeah,
acronyms. Like how can we make this easier to understand and put it in simpler terms so that people understand the basic ideas of it without having to read an entire book on it, you know?
yeah.
One of the super interesting ideas is, so like the East has always understood waking up. The
Mm,
the West is only now understanding what growing up is. And basically the idea is that in order to develop, we need to include both of them. And growing up being spiral dynamics, being every other psychological model that's been developed in the last 50 or 100 years.
yeah.
And so the super interesting thing is like, so these psychological models of growth and ego development, they occur for everyone. They have always occurred throughout history. We are only now understanding that they're happening, but it doesn't mean that they didn't happen before. It just means that
Yeah.
we're only now understanding something that was already there.
Hmm.
But one of the ideas is that there's a distinction, first tier and second tier, right? First tier, one, the characteristic is that you think that your position is right and everyone else's is wrong.
Hmm.
And so like that's where the vast majority of people are at. But like you said, the turning point, right now we're at the turning point where almost 10% of the population is at second tier, which is, second tier is defined by, you can take anyone else's perspective without thinking that your perspective is superior to theirs. So it's like it's more systemic. So it's like you understand that people go through these stages, and that doesn't mean that they're wrong. It just means that that's the most true perspective that they can have, and that doesn't mean that like, so I think the super interesting idea is that like we're growing into this society where in 10, 20, 30 years, the leading edge, like the majority of people are going to have this perspective, because that's how evolution goes, and that's where people go from. That's how people will develop, because we understand using this model that we know people will develop into this perspective. So what does that mean when everyone stops fighting against each other because they think that their perspective is right and the other person's is wrong, and they're actually able, like, that's exciting stuff. Like, what does that a world like look like if we stop, like, obviously there's always going to be people that are in the first tier, because like right now probably 90% of people are in first tier. But what happens when rather than 5% of people are in second tier, 50% are?
I don't think that's a question that I can answer, but absolutely fun to talk about.
It's so fun.
Well, the first thing that came to mind for some reason was that our defense budget would be absurdly lower, and that we spend so much money on like international defense and like I don't know. I think a big impetus or a big reason why we don't integrate society and wake up is because there's so much money in ignorance, and it pays to be afraid and to be stupid and to be dogmatic. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%. 100%.
Like the whole military industrial complex is worth trillions of dollars every year, and that would not be in place if people were able to take another perspective like that.
Yeah.
And so we're highly incentivized to stay in tier one. Yeah, so the world would be nice. I would love if everyone could do that.
I think
What do you think? What would it look like? Like, what's one huge societal impact?
I don't even know. There would be so much inclusion. I don't know what that
How
much
much?
inclusion would look like, because like the difference I see is that right now, so there's all these like protests, there's all this stuff happening of like everyone needs to be equal.
Yeah.
But it's coming at it from the perspective of my perspective is better than yours because I think that everyone should be equal.
Oh my
You see
gosh,
the
yeah.
characteristic, you see the distinction there.
Yeah.
So it's like that's why that was one of the
It's
super.
fake equal.
It's fake equal. It's like, yes, everyone should be equal, and like this is like a better perspective than like not thinking that everyone should be equal. Like obviously everyone should be equal,
Yeah.
but some people aren't at the stage where they can even comprehend that. So it's
Yeah.
like, rather than thinking that my perspective, everyone should be equal, and that's better than your perspective because you don't think that. It's like, all right, everyone should be equal, but what happens when we understand that some people can't get that, and we like some people aren't developed enough to actually like think that way,
For
rather
sure.
than just demonizing them and saying they're wrong. So there's this entire book on like the reason Trump got elected is because his entire campaign was anti-green. Green being what I just talked about. Everyone's equal,
Yeah.
but I'm right and you're wrong. So he
Uh-huh.
basically said, look at how they think they're so much better because they think everyone should be equal. And like he kind of put that rhetoric out. That's why he got elected. What happens when instead of thinking that way, we think like everyone should be equal, but like but we try to
Are
include,
mature. We're mature about it.
yeah, we try to include everyone that's not able to understand that, rather
Yeah.
than demonizing them. We try to
Yeah.
include them and like create a system that understands that and build structures around that, rather than just demonizing everyone and saying that you need to get on my level and get
Yeah.
understand that everyone should be equal, you know.
Yeah. It's just like fighting fire with fire kind of thing,
Yeah.
for sure.
Same with like the
Do
drug
you
war,
do you
fighting
think
fire
that
with
like
fire.
do you think the people who are like organizing Trump's campaign ever think like, all right, we need to get these orange votes, and then over here there's a lot of people stuck in blue, so we need to get appeal to the blue paradigm, stuff like that, because there are definitely social scientists and like psychologists running the campaigns somehow. You think concepts like that are being used to in the advantage of political gain?
I don't
No.
think so. I think that the model isn't widespread enough. I think that the people that are creating his campaigns don't fall under, because the model, the idea is that the model only kind of really comes about at stage yellow. People really only start becoming interested in the model. Like it could always be there, but like you're not going to be, same with like consciousness work. You have to have a certain level of like inner curiosity and motivation. You have
Uh,
to have a certain level of development to be actually interested in it in the first place. And I
yeah.
don't think that anyone in his cabinet has that developmental level to be like, we need to study integral theory and see how it relates to politics. Like, I don't think people are at that level in his cabinet.
Okay.
But
I'm curious because they're so successful. Like he's a fucking president. I
I
don't
think
know.
there's other psychological tactics that can be used
Yeah.
in like different advertising. I think it's more like shady than like trying to understand integral theory and use it like that. You know,
Yeah.
it's more like how can we control what information people get
It's
so
like
that,
salesmanship
yeah, it's like kind of
and propaganda.
sales and propaganda. It's like manipulative sales though, not like, that's what I kind like. You can go at sales from a good perspective. You can be like, I really believe in this product. I know that this product will help this person, and I'm
Mhm.
selling this because I know I want to help this person. There can
Right.
also be like, I want money. This will bring me more money. I'm going to sell this to you whether it destroys your life or not.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's not all sales is bad, but I think that like the Trump campaign is like, we need to sell this no matter what. So whoever, we need to sell this to as many people as possible in order to become reelected.
Yeah.
I don't know, man.
I don't know either. It's definitely fun to talk about it,
Yeah. But
especially with somebody who's read a bunch of books and watched a bunch of YouTube videos.
I feel like we've watched a bunch of the similar YouTube videos too, or
For
read a bunch of
sure.
similar books. And like,
For
I think
sure.
that's why it's so fun to talk about, is because like, you can talk about this with anyone, but if they have no context for what you're talking about, it's just like you're talking to a wall.
Yeah, for sure.
And so you kind
And
of have a lot of
because
this shared language.
we have a similar vocabulary, so we can like point specifically to very like nuanced ideas that if we didn't have that shared vocabulary, it would be so hard to like explain that. But yeah, it's very cool.
100%. All right, I'm going to wrap up this podcast. Any closing words?
Um,
Go
no.
meditate. Go
Yeah,
contemplate.
go meditate. Check out my website, emptyforum.com.
There you go.
I write essays on there. It's fun. Yeah, go meditate. Question everything.
There you go.
Yeah, and okay, this is what I want to say.
All right.
The reason I think that we do all of this work is to be happy. It's not about it's the truth makes you happy. Consciousness work makes you happy.
So
And
ignorance is not
if you look
bliss.
at it, ignorance is not bliss. If you look at it and you're really honest about it, the reason that we do this work is because we want to be happier. And when you're directly aligned with that motivation, you can use it to inspire your practice more powerfully. So yeah, become happy. Don't do consciousness work because you should, or because truth is a good thing or anything like that. Do it because it makes you happy. Yeah.
There you go.
And I think that's a good note to end on.
I think so too.